You've gotten a lot farther than you should have. But then you haven't met Frank Horrigan either. Your ride's over, Mutie. Time to die.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Fudge Muppet. My name is Scott, and it's been a long time. Recently, after a hiatus of several years, we are back with a Fallout 4 build. And I know many of you have missed this, and coming back to the game with fresh eyes has been a real treat for us too. Today we have a new build, a power-armored mutant-esque juggernaut of untold destruction, inspired by and echoing the monstrous Frank Horrigan, an Enclave Secret Service agent of enormous size and capability, enhanced by both FEV mutations and his personalized power armor. He was the terrifying end boss of Fallout 2, and this build is our attempt at translating the essence of Frank Horrigan into the role-playing and gameplay aspects of Fallout 4. So we will not be including some ridiculous fanfiction about how Frank Horrigan's consciousness got beamed to the past with some crazy technology, where he becomes the sole survivor. We're keeping this character grounded in Fallout 4's setting, so that the role-playing and story all make sense in this context. So, if entering the Commonwealth wasteland as a crazed ex-Secret Service maniac on a journey to become a power-armored, irradiated super soldier of the wasteland sounds like your idea of a fun time in Fallout 4, then buckle up and prepare to watch the video. Timestamps will be included for every section covering backstory, role-playing, character creation, a complete list of leveling and perks, weapons and gear for early, mid, and late game, as well as a final wrap-up in the last section, which summarizes how the character's stats, gear, and weapon choices all coalesce into a sensational playstyle. But with that all said, let us begin with the tale of Frank Horrigan. Frank was born in Boston. On the surface, he was a regular man, an American patriot, an enemy of communism, a military veteran. He served in the 108th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion. Well, that was what his official records said. Even to his closest family, the reality of his life was unbeknownst to them. Between deployments, he was a classical suburban citizen. He married a lawyer named Nora, and together they had a child, Sean. Frank was a true Nuka-Cola swilling suburban patriot. God bless capitalism. Though, beneath the surface, there was another Frank, one capable of atrocities, because in the depths of his mind, means were justified by the ends. There were, however, some partial truths to Frank's surface life. He really did love his wife and his son. He really did love America. And he really was in the military, but this time was very brief. During his short years in the army, when he was fresh, he was selected as a candidate for a special Black Ops unit codenamed Circuit Breaker. He was screened, trialed, and accepted for his genius-level intelligence and dynamic performance observed in his stellar combat record. Determined, genius, likes to win. These were such notes in the summary of his dossier. Circuit Breaker was a specialized task force dedicated to officially unsanctioned operations on home ground, removing communist apologists, political adversaries, and homegrown insurgencies. Frank believed in America, and whatever crimes he would commit, he thought, were justified by the existential fate that the world faced should they not defeat the Chinese. He was hand-selected for his intellect, but not only that, it was his ability to rationalize to himself, to justify all his actions, and maintain a steady psyche, even when his operations included torture, assassination, and faux terrorist attacks. He was utterly dedicated to the cause. I won't list the war crimes, but speak only of his final and most significant mission. The West Tech Corporation, a major defense contractor for the United States government, was deeply entrenched with the deep state, particularly a shadowy organization that was known as the Enclave. Experiments with FEV, the forced evolutionary virus, were underway, and Frank's Black Ops unit was tasked with defending a transportation of experimental samples to Mariposa. 3 trucks were sent at different times and from different locations, but Chinese intelligence was robust, and their agents had stirred and organized rebel insurgents within the United States, promising them the new glory of communism. The truck containing the FEV samples was escorted by the Circuit Breaker unit in unmarked vehicles armed to the teeth with concealed weapons. Radio intel came through, relaying warnings speaking of blocked traffic ahead. A detour route was taken. Frank's unit was on high alert. These were uncharacteristic orders, and they had no way of knowing that on the other end of the radio there were 2 Crimson Dragoons, Chinese stealth suit assassins, who had coerced the radio operator by point of blade. Their convoy was led straight into a fiery blockade of cars. It was an ambush. A band of communist Americans, Second Amendment hippies, seeking to uncover a great conspiracy, launched from their hiding positions, perched on the cliffs, and attacked. Task Force circuit breakers sprang into action, and with their 10mm silenced submachine guns, they deployed from their vehicles and quickly and efficiently dispatched the interlopers. It was a massacre. The truck driver was shot by the insurgents, and one of them managed to break into the back, and when Frank arrived to apprehend him, there was a standoff. He held a detonator, threatening to destroy the contents, and he began speaking Chinese in a mocking tone, no doubt one of the Chinese insurgents who organized this rabble. Frank was in a tight spot, and in an attempt to save the contents, he fired his gun, killing his target near instantly. Yet the detonator went off, and there was a great explosion of FEV chemicals, and Frank was thrown back onto the road. Frank was recovered by the other members of the team, and the evidence of this battle was covered up. Frank had been exposed to small amounts of FEV, and Enclave doctors assessed him for months before he would be returned home. His face was terribly scarred, and the official story he would tell his wife is that it was a result of an explosion during the battle in Anchorage. Shortly before the bombs fell, he was contacted by the Enclave with orders to report back. Something was wrong with his latest results. His body had been affected by the FEV, yet he never gets to return and address this condition, because later that morning, the Great War began, and he rushed his family to Vault 111. Frank Horrigan leaves Vault 111 concerned only with cold-blooded revenge. His main concern is killing the bastard who murdered his wife and tracking down his son, Sean. Calling back on his time in his Black Ops unit, he will again have to adapt and survive in a situation with little to no outside support. This is obviously where you begin your journey as Frank Horrigan. As a little role-playing note on his physical appearance, there will obviously be some difficulties in replicating Frank Horrigan, the Fallout 2 villain, since A, we never see his actual face beneath the helmet, and B, he is a super mutated power-armored freak, which the Soul Survivor is not. So in order to best emulate this appearance, I chose to go with the basic preset and modify it with broader features, intense burn scarring, and hazy blue eyes. Also, I think it is important to make him as bulky as possible. Now, if you listen to the backstory, you would know that this burn scarring and damaged eyes are a result of the FEV fire explosion during his most recent mission before the bombs fell. You have many options of a path when entering the wasteland because, characteristically, Frank is versatile and able to adapt to many different situations by overcoming any practical or moral hurdle that he needs to in order to make his mission successful. I would advise that you do the practical thing and meet Codsworth in Sanctuary and then help the Minutemen in Concord, offering you a suit of T-45 power armor, which is something we want to use as much as possible for this build. You could help the Minutemen if you wanted, and it may make more sense earlier in the playthrough, but I wouldn't recommend it because he is most certainly focused on finding his son. As a side note, the idea I had for this playthrough of this build is essentially a deteriorating psyche and a progressively strengthening body due to the FEV exposure, which due to the fact he is no longer in cryo, has sped back up in its mutation, and we explain this progression through level ups, perks, and increases to special stats, so that we can become more like the monstrous maniac that Fallout 2's Frank Horrigan was. His deteriorating psyche is not some crazed loss of function, but it is something more akin to a devolution into a psychopath, especially as he is immersed in the cruelty of the wasteland and becomes privy to certain revelations about his son. In Fallout 4's story, you'll be making certain faction choices, and it would be in this character's nature to play the factions off one another for as long as they can to maximize his personal benefit from them. But ultimately, how or if you juggle them is up to you, and they will make more or less sense depending on which stage of the playthrough you are in. However, at the end of it all, our Frank Horrigan here is going to side with the Institute. Thematically, they make a suitable replacement for the Enclave, and with unlimited medical, technical, and logistical resources such as a teleporter, I think it would be the best fit. Frank will be the Institute's insane special agent wreaking havoc on the wasteland, stomping out all opposition, and as his moral guardrails decline further, as his psyche deteriorates with the FE virus within him, I think the Far Harbor DLC will provide for some interesting character development, particularly in that he may become convinced of the crazed ideology of the Children of Atom. The Children of Atom may convince him to become one of them, and he will embrace the radiation, which thanks to his FEV exposure, he can manage greater levels of it. This is just a role-playing rationalization as to why he will maintain a 75 to 80% rad exposure so that he can best take advantage of the Nerd Rage perk, the Inquisitor of Atom perk, as well as some good synergies with some potential gear finds. I think it makes for a very cool mutated soldier angle for this character, but the gameplay ramifications of this will become all the more clear in future sections of the video. Now, before we move on to character creation, I would like to talk about companions. Personally, I think some of the more morally flexible characters are preferable, people like MacCready, Strong, Kate, or X-0688. MacCready is a hired merc, so he fits well enough, but given Frank's personality, I think the super mutant Strong or the Institute's X-0688 are good accompanying foot soldiers. Kate is a potential choice, as she kinda just likes being a dick, but as you progress her story, her outlook on life changes. Hell, maybe even Frank falls in love. If you must. But I will say her perk Trigger Rush, which causes action points to regenerate 25% faster if your health is at 25% or lower, is pretty damn good if combined with our high radiation Nerd Rage playstyle. Kate can also help you with lockpicking, but if I'm being honest, I think X-0688, a Synth Courser servant, is much more appropriate for the character of Frank Horrigan. Okay. Let's talk about the gameplay specifics of character creation. The starting special stats for this character are 5 strength, 1 perception, 4 endurance, 1 charisma, 10 intelligence, 4 agility, and 3 luck. This gives us our base to enhance later on, but typically we are going to neglect charisma and perception. This character's weapon choices are heavy weapons with either wide impact ranges or fit a sort of manual spray and pray playstyle, and we really aren't utilizing VATS early on. Action points will mainly be for sprinting and power attacking at the start. Also, because of low investment in perception, we forego lockpicking. But a bulky Frank Horrigan monster maniac doesn't exactly strike me as the kind of guy that sits around fiddling his little fingers with locks. Plus, we will have the hacker perk, which gives us access to some locked away locations. Low charisma also doesn't really matter for this kind of guy who solves his problems with violence. With the bobblehead later on and a single point investment, you could access the Lone Wanderer perk if that is your preference, but I like to have companions earlier in the game. They can be handy when you have to rely on Unarmed more, and they have lockpicking or meat shield distraction utilities, plus there's more story content with them. Now, you'll want to get your hands on a beer or some kind of intelligence-lowering consumable. It is easy enough to buy or loot, and you can find one in one of the Sanctuary House's basements. Anyways, where you get the beer doesn't matter, it's just important that you do so before you pick up the special book that can be found in your old home in Sanctuary. The reason for this is with 10 intelligence, we can drink the beer, making it lower with a -1 modifier, so the game thinks we have 9 intelligence temporarily, therefore we can then pick up the special book just after consuming the beer, and it allows us to put a point into intelligence, making it a permanent 11 once the beer wears off, and when you get the intelligence bobblehead in the Boston Public Library, which can be achieved decently early, you will have a permanent 12 intelligence, and since we will mostly live in armor, with the internal database mod in the helmet offering +2 intelligence, we should be walking around with 14 intelligence most of the time after level 17, when we can access that armor mod with science 2. And of course, all put together, this boosts the hell out of our leveling speed, and this can be boosted further, especially by consuming mentats or berry mentats right before turning in quests. At the end of the day, this build has a fantastic leveling speed, which I think from a role-playing perspective is quite important, because for this character, it represents both his genius and dynamic intellect, as well as the effects of the FEV exposure rapidly mutating him into a superior being. So outside of that initial intelligence special book workaround, you're free to grab the rest of the bobbleheads in whichever order you would prefer. After the leveling section, we will sum up the late game stats, which just means level 50, an arbitrary arbitrary point we picked to represent a fully realized build. Okay, so it's time to jump into the perks. I'm going to take you through leveling at each stage, explaining my choices and presenting how they factor into the build. I've arbitrarily divided this section into 3 parts. Early game, levels 1 through 20, mid game, levels 20 through 35, and late game, levels 35 through 50, which in my experience largely encapsulates a Fallout 4 playthrough. However, of course, you can continue this build and devolve it how you like. I will add in some suggestions at the end. Anyways, let's start with the early game. Early game perks are in this order. When we hit level 2, we will take Nuclear Physicist rank 1. We do want to make use of power armor even in the early game, and this will help ensure we can maximize its usage. It offers a 25% bonus to fusion core duration, and we can also get the repair bobblehead at the Corvega assembly facility near Lexington pretty early on, which gives us an additional 10%, making for a total of a 35% boost to fusion core duration in the early game. This over the duration of your playthrough will help you accumulate plenty of fusion cores through preservation. At level 3, we go for Hacker so that we can get into advanced terminals, followed by Gun Nut rank 1. You may be wondering why Gun Nut? Well, late game, Gun Nut rank 2 is necessary to max out the Gatling laser and Tesla cannon in terms of mods. However, at this stage of the game, we aren't really taking preference of any particular weapon over others, so Gun Nut allows us to modify our selection of early game weapons, pipe rifles, 10mm pistols, shotguns, and the like, so it actually has some utility early on. Next, we get Science rank 1, as this will be useful for power armor and energy weapon crafting. Following this, we start on Armorer with rank 1, mainly for power armor boosting purposes. At level 7, we will get rank 1 of Bloody Mess. For Frank Horrigan, I think this perk is a must-have. It offers a 5% damage buff across the board, but the main reason for this is most certainly inspired by the grisly Fallout 2 deaths that can occur. I feel like dying to Frank Horrigan would always be terribly violent, and so thematically, this is a fun pick. Level 8, we get started on our Unarmed with Iron Fist, increasing damage by 20%, and at this stage we'll probably be using it as an ammo saving method for our guns, or close quarters and power armor, but we aren't at Frank Horrigan one-puncher Deathclaw stage yet. Level 9, we will get Hacker 2 for hacking expert terminals, followed by Nerd Rage rank 1 at level 10. Nerd Rage makes it so that when your health drops below 20%, time slows and you gain plus 20 damage resistance and 20% more damage. It's a neat little fail-safe boost, but that's all it will be until much later in the game, when we leverage high radiation techniques as an armored tank so that we can proc Nerd Rage all the time. More on that later. Level 11 is Bloody Mess 2, making it a total of 10% more damage, again just helping us across the board, because we will be using whatever guns are available to us at this point, and our intended use of heavy weapons isn't really viable for the most part in the early game, so we invest in that later. Iron Fist 2 is at level 12, followed by Armored rank 2, and then Nuclear Physicist rank 2 at level 14, bringing our Fusion Core total duration boost to 60%, including the repair bobblehead. Following this, Gun Nut rank 2 is useful for extra utility as we are still using diverse weaponry, and this is the final rank we will need for our late game weapon customization. I then like to get Scrounger, as it allows us to find more ammo, which A, can be used in our guns, considering our diverse array of weaponry, but it's also weightless and can be sold for good prices depending on what it is. And down the line, you sometimes get lucky and find boxes with 4 fusion cores in them. At level 17, we go for Science rank 2, which offers us various customization abilities, including laser weapons, which we should have access to by this point, but also very importantly, I would prioritize putting in the internal database mod for our power armor helmet, likely T45 at this point, but this mod will increase our intelligence in the power armor by 2. I think it would be fair to say that with the special book trick mentioned earlier and the acquisition of the intelligence bobblehead at the Boston Public Library, then we will have a baseline intelligence of 12 enhanced to 14 when wearing the power armor with this mod, and all this should help us level at a much faster pace. Again, just a reminder, but it is important to focus on intelligence boosting properties for this character because it will maximize the XP gain over the long term. Level 18, we will be taking Iron Fist rank 3. We do 60% more unarmed damage at this point, and our power armor attacks now have a chance to cripple. Following this at level 19, we take Scrounger 2, like rank 1 but better, and then at level 20 we take rank 1 of Blacksmith, which allows us to make modifications to unarmed weapons we may be using outside of our power armor, as well as modify the arms of the power armor itself. But that covers the early game leveling. By this point we are established in being able to use power armor for longer durations thanks to Nuclear Physicist, and also thanks to our selection of perks we can upgrade the power armor itself to maximize its defensive properties and its utilities, such as the intelligence boosting through internal database. But by this point we are still using a variety of guns that are decently upgraded, but our specialty is punching heads close in power armor. However, we are about to step into a new stage, the mid game, where heavy weapons are going to start being feasible, considering we have access to more funds, ammo, and actual weapon types. Entering the mid-games, which I would consider between levels 20 and 35, we have a bit of a rapid transformation. First, at level 21, we get rank 3 of Hacker, allowing us to hack master terminals now. Then we follow up at level 22 with Blacksmith rank 2. Levels 23, 24, and 25 are spent leveling Heavy Gunner to rank 3, offering 60% more heavy weapons damage and increased hipfire accuracy. In 3 levels, we have now brought our heavy weapons up to par so we can begin using them, embracing the Horrigan-esque qualities of what will be the final setup. Level 26, we can take Nuclear Physicist rank 3, giving us, with the Repair Bobblehead, a total of 110% fusion core duration, which is going to come in handy, especially as later they will be used in our Gatling Laser 2, and it's fun to be dropping them as little nuclear explosions behind you when things get hot. Level 27 and level 28 will be spent getting Armorer 3 followed by Science 3, resulting in significant boosts for our set of power armor. Level 29 will be Blacksmith rank 3, so we can get those Tesla braces on our power armor and the heating coil on the Furious Power Fist that we will use as a backup. More on that in the gear sections. Level 30 we take Scrounger 3, more ammo is good, especially since we churned through it. Level 31 is Iron Fist 4, getting us 80% more damage and increased cripple chance. Bloody Mess 3 at level 32 gives us a flat 15% damage boost. Levels 33 and 34 we throw special points into our agility stat, affording us more action points for sprinting and VATS. It should be at 6 now, provided that you have found the bobblehead. And then to cap off the mid-game stage at level 35, we take Heavy Gunner rank 4, which gives us 80% more damage total, and our heavy weapons now have a chance to stagger. So by this stage, at the end of the mid-game levels, we have now established ourselves as a heavily armored super soldier that uses powerful weapons to kill muties.
Your ride's over, Mutie. Time to die.
Okay, so now we enter the late game stages of level 35 to 50. It's time to lock in and squeeze some more juice out of this guy. The FEV is really taking root, and we are molding to our power armor, getting more and more psychotic. Levels 36, 37, and 38 are spent cashing in our agility investment by taking ranks 1, 2, and 3 of Action Boy, which gives us a hearty total of a 75% boosted action point refresh rate. This will take our VATS usage to new heights, as well as make us speedier sprinter type character, but this won't be fully realized yet. At level 39 we'll get the final rank of Armorer, allowing us to max out our armor rating for our suit, followed by a special point added into agility at level 40, and then at level 41 we are able to get Science 4, which means that by this stage we are able to fully kit out our power armor and our Gatling laser and Tesla cannon with all the modifications that we desire. At levels 42 and 43 we pump our agility again, so that we end off with a total of 10 agility, including the bobblehead. 9 if for whatever reason you haven't got it yet, but either way, at levels 44 and 45, we will be taking Blitz ranks 1 and 2. This vastly increases the melee VATS distance, allowing us to basically teleport forward to strike our opponents. You could even roleplay that this is the Institute teleporter in action, and this also increases the damage bonus based on distance. So when or if you ever run out of ammo, or you just want to go psycho on someone's ass, you can do so with ease. You may, like Frank Horrigan of Fallout 2, just want to punch a Deathclaw in the face. Level 46 we get the final rank of Iron Fist, giving us double damage and criticals in VATS that can paralyze the opponent, but this doesn't really work with power armor. Anyways, we want that raw damage boost. At level 47 we go for Heavy Gunner 5, giving us double damage with them. We also get Nerd Rage 2 at level 48, followed by a boost to Endurance at level 49, and finally capping off with Nerd Rage rank 3 at level 50. This gives us 40 damage resistance and 40% more damage as Nerd Rage is in effect, and kills while enraged restore some lost health. With our power armor maxed out and being later in the game with more resources, it's far safer to employ the Nerd Rage strategy, which is to maintain 80% radiation or around abouts that, so that we are always forced to around 20 to 25% health, so that the second we take some damage, Nerd Rage will proc and we will get 40% more damage, just allowing us to annihilate things and gain that health back. You will have seen it in practice during this video, but I think it's a really fun strategy that is much more viable with a radiation resistant set of power armor with enormous armor rating protections, so that the 20% health we do have goes quite far. Plus, at this stage, our damage will just annihilate things before they can really hit us. Also, if you sided with the Children of Adam, destroyed Far Harbor, and completed the quests Heretic or Witch Hunt in the way Frank Horrigan would, so as violent as possible, you will receive a perk called Inquisitor of Atom, which increases your damage the more irradiated you are, 10% more for every 100 rads. So being heavily radiated is an extra benefit here, resulting in just huge damage. At about 75% radiation at level 50 with all the perks, my Tesla cannon did 504 damage and my Gatling laser 93 damage, aka a delete button. The constantly irradiated playstyle also reminds me more of a progressively mutating FEV soldier. It's also possible to just forego this element of the gameplay and just keeping Nerd Rage as a fail-safe only, but that's up to you. It's also worth mentioning that if you do maintain high radiation levels, it will stack very well with things like the Inquisitor's Cowl, further boosting intelligence, and with armor pieces that carry the Unyielding effect, which confers +3 to all stats when at 25% or less health, which would be always with that strategy, and high stats feels very Frank Horrigan. Speaking of which, I mentioned earlier that I would give some thoughts on where to take the build from here. I think the core of this build is more than set, but there are many ways you could continue playing for many more levels if you so chose, and perhaps due to scaled intelligence and the use of berry mentats at ideal mission turn-in times, you will have netted some fat XP, and perhaps you're not done with your playthrough by level 50. So personally, I would suggest maxing out your strength and endurance stats, invest in the rooted perk to gain a big damage boost to your Blitz, VATS, Unarmed kills, because they count as you being still, and Pain Train for some thematic steamrolling. You could also put a point in Charisma and pump up Lone Wanderer for even more damage and resistances, but this may not be necessary at this point, though going companionless might make for a good role-playing angle at the end of the game. Ultimately, the late game special stats at level 50 Frank Horrigan build with bobbleheads and the special book taken, as well as several special stat boosts through leveling, should be 6 strength, 2 perception, 6 endurance, 2 charisma, 12 intelligence, 10 agility, and 4 luck. I am aware that Fallout 2's Frank Horrigan had 10 in every stat, and if you like to, you can work towards that, though unfortunately, Fallout 4's character creation works with a base of 1 in every stat and 21 points to distribute, versus the old system of 5 in everything as a base stat and then 5 points to distribute. So, getting to 10 in every stat takes a good deal more work, and if you're game for it, you certainly can, but from a gameplay perspective, maxing charisma and perception won't really bring that much benefit to this build. But that, I think, is pretty much everything you may want to know stats and perk-wise. Let's now get into a similar process explaining the gear. Weapons and gear, of course, varies as you progress through your playthrough, so this section will try to cover some recommendations and equipment goals, following up to late game gear which ends with a fully realized character. For Frank Horrigan, the early game is going to be a situation of make do, and the closest we can get to a pimped out power armored soldier is by acquiring the T-45 power armor on top of the roof by the crashed vertibird. Until you can find yourself something better, that's your shtick. At this point, in terms of level progression, we don't have a particular focus aside from a bit of Iron Fist for backup in close quarters, but for the most part, perks like Gun Nut, Armorer, Nerd Rage, and Bloody Mess will be providing enough cross-weapon type utility so that we can engage in a variety of weaponry, whether that be the double-barrel shotgun, hunting rifle, laser rifle, or even automatic variants. The reality is that heavy weapons in the early game are not as feasible as you might like, considering that they have high ammo consumption, and as well there's just low amounts of their ammunition to be found or buy this early. I think you're just better waiting until later. The goal of this character is to maintain himself fully kitted out in power armor at all times. However, when outside, any real variation of armor will do. Better to pick something like a harness and equip armor pieces over the top, which can be upgraded for unarmed benefits. Speaking of which, there is one weapon in particular that should be achievable in the later stages of the early game, and that is the Furious Power Fist from the corpse of Swan in Swan's Pond. This can only be used outside of the power armor, but it makes for a robust backup in such situations. But again, at this stage, we will be utilizing guns. We aren't a sole unarmed character. Note: Frank Horrigan in Fallout 2 has a giant bladed scythe type thing on his wrist, and he also has a plasma cannon type weapon mounted underneath his other wrist. Unfortunately, we just can't do this in vanilla Fallout 4, and I was tossing up between unarmed power armor or power armor with a bladed weapon. The Assaultron blade was a decent enough look, but more effective, but smaller weapons like the Disciple's knife just looked silly. You can, if you want, go with melee and swap out the Iron Fist perks for Big Leagues perks, but I just liked the gimmick of Frank Horrigan tearing things apart with his bare hands, and I just found the idea of punching a Deathclaw to death more appealing from a role-playing perspective. By the mid-game, that is level 20 to 35, you should be able to get your hands on some T51 or T60 power armor and upgrade it respectively, and at this point we are investing intensely in the Heavy Gunner perk, allowing us to make full use of heavy weaponry like the minigun or perhaps a Fat Man. Now, the ultimate setup for this character will involve the X-02 Enclave power armor that can be found during the Echoes of the Past quest that comes with a Fallout 4 Next Gen update. This questline also leads to the acquisition of the Tesla cannon. However, these could be quite challenging enemies earlier on, but ultimately, as soon as you can acquire the X-02 power armor, that is ideal. But for the ultimate look, we are going to want to get our hands on the X-01 power armor helmet in order to appear the most like Frank Horrigan possible. This stage of the game is quite variable in terms of gear acquisition, but let's move on and talk about the late game gear. It's a lot easier to work backwards from the ideal setup, I think, so let's talk about that. By the late game, we will want to get our hands on the X-02 power armor with the X-01 power armor helmet equipped for the look. Let's break it down piece by piece. Every single piece will ideally be upgraded to Mark 6 for increased resistances. The helmet will have the Hot Rod shark paint, which fits in nicely with the rest of the scheme, as I had a bit of trouble matching the texture and colors of the X-02 and X-01 armors. This has the internal database mod offering +2 intelligence, and the headlamp will be red tactical, so we can have those iconic red glowing eyes. Each of the arm pieces will be equipped with hydraulic braces for increased unarmed damage, and Tesla braces, which adds energy damage to our unarmed attacks and increases Tesla coil damage. These will also be painted with green paint to emulate the exposed mutant arms of Frank Horrigan. The chest piece will have the tan paint and a kinetic dynamo mod, which recharges action points when damage is taken. You could go for jetpack if you wanted, but I like the visuals of it without. We also get the Tesla coils modification, which emits electrical damage to nearby enemies, providing that extra struggle for enemies to face us in close combat, that is before their heads are exploded in with a single punch. On the legs, we go for tan paint to fit with the scheme, Tesla on both legs for the extra Tesla coil damage, and optimized servos for reducing sprinting AP cost. All in all, that is the power armor kitted out, but of course, to fully realize this, we will need to have acquired the perks Science 4 and Armorer 4, as well as Blacksmith 3. But if you follow the leveling guide, that can be done by level 41. I also want to mention that you can of course go for an all black look or try to get the silverish look, but like I said, I had a hard time making the X-01 helmet fit nicely with X-02 as it has smoother textures and different paints available, but I think what we ended up with captures the vibe well enough. Again, this whole build is made to capture the essence of Frank rather than be a one-to-one, because that's largely impossible without mods, and lore-wise, not at all. Anyways, let's talk weapons, and then I can talk about some suggestions for armor that isn't the power armor. Our premier weapons are the Tesla cannon and the Gatling laser. Huge damage output, heavy weapons that just look high-tech and gnarly. The Tesla cannon is upgraded with the following: the Tesla beaten assembly, which transforms it from a cannon-like explosion to a Tesla-like effect that links to enemies in a chain. We go with the improved beaten amplified lens to absolutely max out damage. It comes with inferior accuracy and recoil, but it's easy to wield regardless. You can go for the beam focuser over it if you prefer greater accuracy, but the way I see it is that Frank Horrigan is an absolute raw force of nature, up close and personal, enough that he won't be sniping targets from miles away, so I went with the higher damage. And finally we max out its damage with the triple resonant wave oscillator. Whatever that means, it pumps up our damage a ton. So that is option number 1 for weapon choice, and it uses the plentiful fusion cells, so that's a plus. Second is the Gatling laser, which is a powerful choice, and thanks to the next gen update we can even give it some nice looking enclave paint. We give it the overcharged capacitor to boost the hell out of its damage. We keep the standard barrels because I just love that whirring high fire rate havoc so much more for Frank Horrigan, quick and nasty. Throw on a reflex sight for convenience, and finally the beam focuser for better range, accuracy and recoil. I also lucked out and found a legendary one with the kneecapper effect, which gives a 20% chance to cripple a target's leg, so I am most definitely just crushing kneecaps throughout all this footage. A Gatling laser uses fusion cores, and thanks to the nuclear physicist and the Scrounger perk, I am willing to bet that at this stage of the game we have plenty of them. However, you may for whatever reason want to step outside and smell the roses to be outside your power armor for once. Not very Frank Horrigan of you, but if you must, then I would recommend the Furious Power Fist. As stated before in the early game section, though you could mod it with the heating coil instead to fit a more polished vibe, it adds energy damage. As for the armor, I went for all Assault Marine pieces from the Far Harbor DLC. They are pretty strong and have a professional soldier look to them, plus they give a bulkier silhouette. The legs are custom fitted, so they reduce the AP cost for sprinting. The chest piece is ultra light for reduced weight and increased AP bonus, and the arms are weighted for some unarmed armor penetration. Ultimately, this setup shouldn't really be in use, as the fun of the Frank Horrigan build is being a FEV mutated power armored death machine, which at least to me involves being inside power armor. Okay, so I'm not sure how necessary this section may even be, given that you've been watching footage of this guy fighting his way through enemies for over 30 minutes, but maybe you guys will find this recap summary helpful. Primarily, this Frank Horrigan build is a power-armored juggernaut who wields a Gatling laser and Tesla cannon to just eviscerate all his enemies, but he isn't in the back taking pot shots. As his psyche deteriorates over time in the wasteland, and due to the gradual FEV exposure taking root, now that he is no longer in cryo, he will relish in the violence, more so in engaging in closer quarters than necessary, and like I said before, sometimes he just wants to have fun bashing a Deathclaw's head in. Unarmed is more than anything a flavor choice for this build. I wanted to represent Frank's ability to just tear things apart with his bare hands, plus with Blitz it gets damn fun. The idea that he can close the gap like that is terrifying, but like I said earlier, the experience of this playthrough is really about becoming Frank Horrigan, not starting as him. So a lot of these abilities and facets of gameplay are not opened until later levels. Then again, he is built for leveling fast, so you should see more of these cool perks earlier. I also mentioned the Nerd Rage playstyle, optimized with 80% radiation damage accrued, though I often just kept it at 75% so I didn't have that constant heart beating effect. Ultimately forcing a 20 to 25% health state, always proccing a slowed time, 40% damage increase period, which also restores health on kills for most of your gameplay. This works so well with the Inquisitor of Adam perk, which boosts damage even further than that. It's riskier, but beneath layers of reinforced cloistered power armor, you should be golden by the time this perk transforms from a failsafe to a playstyle at level 50. Just a note, the salvaged Assaultron head from the Automatron DLC is a very convenient, surefire way of accruing the amount of radiation that you want, as it gives radiation damage when fired, so it might be handy to have that around for that purpose. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this brand new Fallout 4 build. The Fallout show really reinvigorated our interest in the series, and having spent some time away, it's nice to come back feeling fresh and nostalgic as ever. We plan on doing more builds, and we would love to hear your desires in the comments below. I'm very tempted to remaster some of our first Fallout 4 builds, especially in light of the DLCs that were released afterwards, and as well we have some ideas for different optimizations, and as much as they were loved, I feel as if we can can do a much better job of the writing and the backstory and role-playing and such. Anyways, let us know if you're keen for more Fallout content. Subscribe to Fudge Muppet, like the video. I'm Scott, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.